Hi everyone, I'm Ava and I'm an American living in the Netherlands, and today I wanted to share with you some of the more broader systematic things that I wish America just did differently. Now, I've lived in the Netherlands for a year and a half now, so I've had the opportunity to experience some of these differences firsthand. I've seen that things could be better while, living in Europe, and then thinking about the good old days when I lived in America and I dealt with these things, and then I saw people dealing with these things, and people continue to deal with the things that I will be sharing with you today. So let's dive into it. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the ridiculous cost of healthcare in the US. People literally go bankrupt over the cost of their medical expenses, and that should just not be the case. So in comparison, here I pay 100 euros a month for health insurance, which is obligatory, so I need to get health insurance. That is 100 euros a month, and that covers a lot of the basic things. It covers free visits to my general practitioner, and if I wanted to add a little extra frills like dermatology, that would be, I don't know what, like 12 euros a month extra, something like that. Same goes for dental. So guess what? Since I moved to the Netherlands, I was actually able to go to the dentist. In the US, that was a luxury. There was this one year where I had half off dental insurance, and that was the year I saw the dentist. That was 4 years ago. So obviously, I'm really happy now. I have nice teeth. I always have nice teeth. But I'm happy to be able to go to the dentist and have my dentist tell me that I have nice teeth, just to be sure. In the US, that is not an option for many people. If you are not American and watching this, you might be thinking to yourself, hey Ava, how expensive could it be? Well, leaving aside, medical emergencies, which could cost, I don't know, like tens of thousands of dollars if you have your appendix removed, this is true. The prices can vary and be absolutely crazy. But what I'm gonna share with you instead is this article that I read in the New York Times about a few families and what they spend in a month. And what I actually took out of that was how high healthcare costs can be in the US. So there was one family of three, and they spent about $566 a month on their medical expenses. And that seems okay to me as an American. I'm thinking, okay, they're three people, $566 a month. It's a bit steep, but okay. But then I also saw that there was this other family, family of two, a single mom and her kid, and they needed things like braces, and they had dermatology expenses, and they spent a whooping $2,500 a month on their medical costs. So at this point, you should be asking yourself, why, what, and how? All valid questions. I do not have the answer for you, but this is the reality of many folks in the US. It's just crazy. That shouldn't be the case. That is a salary for a full month. Also, that's my cat. I don't know why he decides to spend time with me only when I'm making these videos. It's almost as if, he knows. He knows when he's not wanted, and then he thinks to himself, I want what I can't have. Okay, so now that we've established problem number one, let us talk about thing number two, which is, hey, what happens when you want to pay for things like medical expenses and you're a little short on cash? Or what happens when you would like to take out a loan for buying a car or mortgage for a house? Well, in the US, every person comes with a credit score. Well, every adult person. I thought that was normal. I didn't know that you could exist in a society where you didn't have this number attached to you. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this fabulous concept of a credit score, it is a number that ranges from 300 to 850, 850 being really good and 300 being really bad, as an indication of how trustworthy of a borrower you are. Now you think to yourself, okay, that seems reasonable. You might want to have a mechanism to determine that. That's what many Americans think. However, if you go into the details, you really see the problem behind it. For instance, what is the easiest way in which, companies or people can determine whether you are a trustworthy borrower? The easiest way to do that is to have a credit history. And that means you have to open a credit card. But in order to do that, you need to open up a credit card with private credit companies. This very quickly leads to a vicious cycle because the interest rates on credit cards are abnormally high. They are extremely high, and then if you are someone who needs money and takes that money out, you are probably also someone who is less likely to be able to pay that back, and so on. And if you think to yourself, hey, why don't you just try and avoid using credit cards? Well, in the US, that is kind of impossible. If you have an address, you will be flooded with mail, tons and tons of mail. I would say I used to get mail at least a couple of times a month saying, you have been pre-approved for yet another credit card, and here is $1,000 that you can use today. Now, for many people, of course, that is a lucrative option if they are, short for cash in that period of time. Now, in the Netherlands, there is no number. If you have borrowed something, if you, for instance, let's say you bought a cell phone and you have monthly payments on that cell phone, then you will be registered in a system. So if you are someone who has borrowed something, then you show up in a system. If you haven't borrowed anything, that means you are good to go. Who'd have thunk that it could be that simple? So this is something I wish that were different in the US, because I know many people in the US suffer from credit card debt. It is a problem that goes right up there with student loans, which I will not be talking about today, medical costs, and then credit card debt. Hey, but if you're thinking to yourself, oh no, these poor Americans with their credit cards, let me just reassure you, not all is bad in the US, because you can use those credit cards to buy really great things, like guns. It is so easy to buy guns in America. You could just walk into your local Walmart in some states and just pick one up. Dutch people, could you imagine here in the Netherlands if you could go into the HEMA and just buy a gun? I mean, think about it. If you pissed off your neighbors for whatever reason, do you really want to know that they could so easily go into a store, buy a gun, and then maybe if they're really upset at you, use the freaking gun? I actually shouldn't be making jokes about this or any of the things I'm talking about today because they lead to serious problems. But some people, they just laugh when they're extremely nervous. Like me, I'm nervous all the time, so I'm always laughing. I'm also always using self-deprecating humor to release the tension. Okay, but the fact that Americans love their guns isn't exactly breaking news. But you know what surprised me? I was surprised when I saw this estimate by the BBC News. They had a list of the top 10 countries with the most firearms per resident. And then I discovered that per 100 residents in the US, there are 120 firearms that you can estimate for them. 120 firearms per 100 civilians. That's a lot of firearms. That is more firearms than people. In the Netherlands, there are more bicycles than people. That's very different. Bicycles are fun. They only sometimes injure people. Guns, on the other hand, so not the case. All this gun talk now leads me to a different topic, because the control over who can have firearms and who can use them is a political issue. Which brings me to the two-party system in the US. In the US, you have the Democrats and the Republicans, left-wing, right-wing, extreme views. In the Netherlands, you have about 427 parties to choose from, and then each party has, I don't know, about 1,000 people. So you see that you have a lot of choices. That was an exaggeration by a lot, but there are a lot of parties and a lot of people you can vote for in the Netherlands. And because you have all of these options here, you can actually go into the issues, the topics that matter into more detail and be more nuanced about it. Now, in the US, because you have these two political parties, sometimes, that's me being generous, all the time what you get are polar opposite views about things that you think that people shouldn't even be fighting about, like climate change or global warming, however you want to call it. In the Netherlands, I watched the debate before the elections, and the people running for office, they were talking about how they would address global warming and climate change and what they thought the best option was. Now in the US, Republicans and Democrats, you have people talking about there is no climate change and there is climate change, and this shouldn't be the type of conversation we should be having. But because I think the two-party system actually facilitates having these polar opposite views. And with the advent of social media, I think that's getting way worse. I'm not an expert on this, but people who are experts, I listen to them and then I hear what's happening, and it's a bit terrifying. I also witnessed this firsthand in the US. So if I'm very liberal, I'm a Democrat, and if I talk to someone who is right-wing or who is Republican, I often find that I can't agree with them on almost anything. It's that different. So clearly, I'm not a fan of the two-party system in the US. But oh my gosh, while I way prefer the Dutch system, if I could vote, I don't know who I would vote for. There are just so many options. It's like standing in the cereal aisle in an American supermarket. What do I choose? And all of this brings me to the final thing I wanted to share with you today, which is you would think that with all the stress that Americans have to go through, they would at least get some vacation days, some time off for all of it. But oh no, the official number of vacation days required by law is 0. So I wish for my fellow Americans that that were different. If you are an American and working an American job in the US, yeah, I feel for you. Because when you start a job in the US, while I don't know anyone who has 0 holiday days if you have a salaried job and you work full time, I also don't know very many people who have more than the standard 2 weeks. I think there are some friends of mine who've been at their job for longer, so they have closer to 3 weeks off, which is considered really, really good. In the Netherlands, by law, you are required to have at least 20 days off, and many people have way more. So let's say between 24 and 30 is what I've heard people around me report as the number of holiday days they have. But I've mentioned this before that people here in the Netherlands just have like crazy amounts of time off, like 8 weeks. Whereas in the US, that is not the case, and I wish it were different for my fellow Americans. So those were a few things that I, after living in the Netherlands for a year and a half, have noticed about the US that I wish were different. As usual, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I look forward to reading them, I always do, and until next time.